Hi everybody, so thank you for attending today. We'll just give it a couple of minutes. I think we've just got a few other people being admitted to the room, and then we'll begin the session. So thank you for attending today, and we'll start in just a couple of moments. Okay, lovely. So I think we've got the majority of people, so we'll make a start on today's session then. So today we're obviously looking at shaping your future, the art of showcasing your workplace impact. So thank you all for attending today. We've got some really exciting, thought-provoking conversations, which I think everybody will really enjoy. We've got some expert speakers today, Andy Murray, Andrew Brown and Scott Owens, who will all introduce themselves in a couple of moments. Whilst Andy, Scott and Andrew are sharing their experiences today and discussing the various different value and impact, it'd be really great if you could all actually think about questions, think about what these discussions mean to you. We will open at the end where we'll have a questions and answers session. You can either pop your questions in the chat, or at the end, if you raise your hand, we'll be able to do Q&As with our team of experts today. And there is, of course, a free book up for grabs today for the best question. So do make sure that you think about those questions and think about what you want to ask. There we go, Andy Murray, thank you very much. So yeah, have a think about what questions as everybody's discussing. Do feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll either address them during the discussions or we'll address them at the end of the session. So I'll hand over to our experts. So Andy.
Yes, hello everyone. I was going to say good morning, but it's just now gone to the afternoon. So afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Murray. I'm the Executive Director of the Major Projects Association, and I've been involved with the Project Data Analytics Task Force since it was formed back in lockdown in 2020.
If we go to Andrew.
Hi everyone, I'm a data analyst tutor here at Projecting Success. Great to be here, and yeah, we're just going to talk about how you can articulate your impact. So Andy's going to do a talk, and then yeah, just open it up to questions and then relate it back to your apprenticeship as well. So hope you enjoy the session.
Excellent, thanks Andrew. Scott?
Thank you, Teddy. Yes, I'm Scott. I'm also one of the tutors at Projecting Success, a lot of experience in data analysis and in teaching as well. And I think this is a really good opportunity, not just for your apprenticeships, but for your careers as well, to really recognise that the impact that you're having. It'll help with your engagement on the course, it'll help with your end qualification, but it'll certainly help promote yourself for future career potential or opportunities.
Excellent, wonderful. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, brilliant. So, Andy, if I can hand over to you, then please.
Yep. So let me just share my screen, and I think, as I mentioned before you opened it up to everyone, Terry, there is a chance my dog walk will be arriving soon because I'm working from home today. So, so Andrew's agreed to sing a song should that happen. To fill in while I answer the door and let the dogs out. So I think it was Andrew, or was it Scott? I can't remember. Maybe you can do a double act.
No, it was me, yeah.
So welcome everyone. So I'm going to talk a bit about my experience and sort of my journey and sort of and how my sort of data-driven mindset developed and how it sort of shaped my career. And then also about how we can think about showcasing your impact in terms of improving the projects that you work on, or improving a portfolio of projects if you're in a centre of excellence or in a PMO. And to do that, I'm going to think about what is the value of project management overall, and thinking about project management as an experiment and using project management on itself in terms of demonstrating the value that we can make when we improve it. And then we can perhaps open up to a discussion, and hopefully Andrew and Scott and others can bring in their own experiences. So in terms of a data-driven mindset, just come back to, when I started my career, top left on the screen here, it was I started with a tech firm, STC, and worked on one of the first transatlantic telecoms cables, fiber optic cable. So you can see here the different parts, and the bit that's highlighted, the repeater. So that's that every kilometre or so, it repeats the signal and sends it down the fiber optic cable to the next repeater, and the next one, it goes all the way across the Atlantic. And these repeaters are lasers, and they get hot when they operate. And the whole idea of the cable is that you have as much data flowing through it as long as you can. And so you shut these repeaters down just before they get too hot, for milliseconds, and then you turn them back on again. And so there's a lot of supervisory tech that goes on these repeaters. And that was a project that I worked on. So the supervisory system for the repeaters. And a part of our business case is that we had to do it so that these lasers didn't burn out. And if they had to be dragged up more than 3 times in 25 years, then that was the measure that we had. So, but anyway, the story here, which sort of really got my interest in data as a way of informing project decisions, was that we had done 2 or 3 of these. In fact, I think it was a little bit more, because there are different types of these fiber optic cables, and we're bidding for another one. And so I was involved in the bid team, in the cost estimating team for putting together the overall cost for this project. And we spent many months, I think probably something like 4 or 5 months to develop our proposed solution and to understand our cost. And then our estimates went to the board, and the board made a decision as to what that bid price would be. And the context here, this would be one of the biggest projects that we would have worked on at the time. So you call the number right, it's brilliant if you win it and make a profit. If you call the number wrong and you win it and make a loss, that's a disaster. Or you call the number wrong and you're not competitive and you don't get the work. So it's a real issue in terms of calling that right number. Anyway, the work we did on preparing our estimates, we had 3 different models. So we had a model that was a parametric model based upon UK projects, and it came up with a number. There was another model that was called Putnam, because this was principally a software, the biggest bit was the software engineering side. There was another one called Kokomo, which is a US model, and that came up with another number. And of course, we'd had several projects like this before, so we had our own reference class data, and that came up with a different model. So here we'd spent 3 months coming up with an estimate, and I had 3 very different numbers. So which one should our board use was a good question. And I was thinking, well, how can we as professionals spend all this time and come up with 3 very different numbers? Something's wrong. Our data's not truthful, it's not telling us the right, or the models are wrong. But whichever way about it, how can we as professionals get to the point where we don't know how much something is going to cost? Moving on from that, I then worked on a number of retail projects in the mid to late 90s. And it was the same time that Tesco launched their club card. And a bit of context here. So everyone thought it was a loyalty scheme. So a lot of the other retailers copied and also introduced their loyalty schemes, but it wasn't a loyalty scheme at all. It was a data mining scheme, all for the merchandising department to think about their product placement, their micro marketing for special offers to you, and then relating that back to how they procured things from their supply chains. So the success of Clubcard moved Tesco, I think, 4th in the list of UK retailers to 1st within a couple of years. Their growth was something like 18% over that, just in a short period of time. And in retail, that's just unheard of. We normally talk of growth in terms of 0.5%, 1%, and the shift between one retailer and another being quite small. So this was, a seismic event in retail when Tesco launched their club card. And the purpose of club card, as I mentioned before, it was a data mining opportunity, not a loyalty opportunity, because they knew how much gets spent in every store. They know what the average basket size is. They know all sorts of different things in terms of data analytics in a retail perspective, but they didn't know who was buying those things in their store. They couldn't link your credit card to you. And through the data, for the club card rather, they were now able to relate individuals to transactions going through their store. And not only that, they know where you live, and so they can do some linking up to other data sets, and they can understand your social demographics and so on, and they can start to target special offers. So when you got your initial vouchers, the vouchers you got as an individual would be different to the vouchers perhaps your neighbour got, because you've got different needs and different buying habits. So it's very much micro marketing. Moving on from that, in sort of the late noughties into the early teens, I worked at Transport for London, and one of my tasks was to bring together and develop a universal project management framework for all projects across Transport for London. There was something like 6 different life cycles in use at the time. From London Underground had one, the Surface Transport had another, the Estates Department had one, the IT Department had one, and we had to have a universal one. And our question came as to how many stage gates we should have. What are the common stages in a project life cycle? Because these different methods have different number of stages. And we didn't know the answer to that. We couldn't say whether 7 gates was better than 6 gates or better than 5 gates. We just didn't know. And we didn't know that if we had, say, we did know that the average cost of a gate was about £50,000 for the typical project that went through the life cycle, in terms of the amount of effort to produce the pack and the review time and so on. So in theory, 1 gate would be better than 2 because it's cheaper. But actually, if you only had 1 gate, you're more likely to get bad projects going through the decision-making life cycle. So you can see there's a trade-off, and we didn't really know. And again, as a project professional, I found that troubling that we didn't know the right number, the optimum number of gates in a project management life cycle. I also worked on Prince 2, the 2009 version, and the version that came out more recently. And again, it's something that we worked on quite a lot to make sure that what we put into Prince 2 wasn't just Andy's idea, but it was something that we could evidence. So you can see here there's a mixture of a challenge that we're making some decisions, and we're developing ways of working where we don't necessarily have the data, and in other cases where we're really data rich. And so that sort of issue, if you like, that I had with the lack of data, it also relates to a future role I've had in developing those, like the likes of Prince 2, the likes of the TFL pathway, and if any of you have used maturity models, the Portfolio Program and Project Management Maturity Model, or P3M3 as it's called, that's all around capability building, so that at an enterprise level, you've got a common way of working. So it's not about an individual project being successful. You want all of your projects to be successful for the lowest total cost of running your projects for your enterprise as a whole. And so the cornerstones in sort of maturity models can be boiled down to a method or a framework, which covers sort of processes and standards and techniques, a set of tools that help to automate and support that method, competent people to operate that method and use those tools, and then the information and knowledge management that supports the use of that method as well. And the challenge we've got, if we're data poor, then that information and knowledge management is actually just a whole load of anecdotes and guesses. And the challenge we then have is if we've got anecdotes and guesses as the basis of our knowledge management system, then all we're really doing in the tool set is automating the imperfect, and the errors go faster. And likewise, instead of having a method that's proven and evidence-based, it's just a codification of our myths and our legends as to what worked on one project. Might have been a one-off, we actually don't know. Coming back to, is 4 gates better than 5 gates, better than 6 gates? That just becomes a bit of a myth and a legend rather than something that can be evidenced. And then lastly, if we don't have any data that supports that, all we're really doing is empowering heroes and potentially villains, because then it's just a case of arguing that my approach is better than your approach, and the person who shouts loudest usually wins in that argument. So rather than having these sort of cornerstones of capability, if we don't really have good data, then we end up just with illusion that we've actually got organizational capability. So this has been a passion of mine, that we move on from that and we do take a data-driven approach, and that we no longer wing it when it comes to project management. And this is something that I said at a conference about 10 years ago, and it's been thrown back at me quite some time, that that projects without data isn't project management, it is just winging it, it's making it up as we go along. And so that transition from winging it to having data-driven projects is something I've been passionate about, which is why I said right at the beginning I was really keen to get involved with the Project Data Analytics Task Force when it formed in lockdown. And one of the things that we did with the task force was to come up with a manifesto for data-driven projects, and it includes 6 pledges that we should make individually as organizations and as a profession about how we use data in our projects. And you can see here in things like using it to bust some of those myths that we might have captured and codified in our methods and frameworks and bodies of knowledge. So what I'd like to do now is just move on to the second part, and then perhaps we can then sort of think about the discussion aspect about how we can move it from what happens on a project to what we do individually in terms of showcasing our personal impact. And my argument is that project management is an experiment in the same way that a lot of medical practice is an experiment. If one of you was unfortunate to need a medical intervention, a particular course of treatment, it's a really good chance that you'll have to sign a disclaimer to accept that what's going to be done is still under research conditions. It's not a proven outcome, because they're still trying to find the best course of treatment matched to the specific needs that you may have. And I think project management is the same as that, because if it wasn't an experiment, then we would have far more predictable outcomes from our project work. We could guarantee outputs for certain inputs and certain amount of time and money, because our project framework was absolutely proven and not operating as an experiment. So if it is an experiment, what's the objective function, to use a bit of linear programming? What is it that we're trying to optimize? And if we're trying to optimize the value of good project management, then I would argue there's a formula that we could use here, which is around the maximizing the benefits, minimizing our delivery costs, avoiding waste, and actually minimizing our overhead. And now, Andrew, it's your turn to do a bit of singing while I just let the dogs out. I'll be back very quickly.
So I'm not actually going to sing, but just I want you to get you all thinking about how you can relate this back to the apprenticeship. So I'm going to ask Andy in a minute about recording and articulating your impact, how to do that, what kind of language to use. We'll get some really good insights from Andy about why you should do that, the benefits of it, and things like that. So all of these slides, try and relate it back to you and your apprenticeship and how you can apply it. Don't know if Scott, you also wanted to sing a song, or do you have an anecdote actually, don't you, Scott, about your impact?
Absolutely not. No, he's back. He's back. Thankfully, back. You're all saved.
Right, thanks for that. I was listening, Andrew. So yeah, if you can relate it back to your work, and I'll try and make that segue in a moment. But this is the sort of ultimately boil it down to the impact that you can make. It would either be your project is delivering more benefits because of an intervention that you've made, or the delivery costs are lower, or there's less waste, or you've been able to reduce the management overhead. And to help us think in these ways, I use a technique called the power of one, because sometimes it's a bit we can get overawed by the scale of the things we want to improve. And a sort of a tactic that we can use is if we just got one more unit of benefit, so or one less unit of delivery cost, or one less unit of avoidable waste, or one less unit of management cost. And an example there would be on assurance, for example, could we have one less person doing a check because actually not adding value? Or if we're preparing a design document, could we do so, which is a sort of a management cost? Could we do so in a way that it takes us 4 days to create it rather than 6 days? So what is the one unit that you could make an improvement? So it's very much a sort of a productivity type discussion. Now, it may well be for some of you in the delivery, the sort of benefits and delivery are already defined. So if you think about what is the value of project delivery, if that means delivering the benefits to their budget or delivering the project costs to budget, what you're really trying to do then is to have zero waste and at the least management cost or the least overhead. So again, could we actually have self-driving cars? Could we have a self-driving project where we have no management costs? So the project just delivers itself with no project manager, no project planners, no project controllers. It'd be interesting to have that thought experiment. What's the smallest project team you could get away with and still deliver a successful outcome? Is the sort of the thought experiment. But in a moment, let's think about some of that power of one. And just to get you a bit of context of the scale of opportunity that we have, this was an interview with the Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey, about 3 weeks ago with the Institute for Government. And it was a quote that sort of made quite a few people sit back. I've not done any fact checking on this, but so let's take it at face value. But he said in defence, there's a lot of process and procedure, and in assurance or compliance, you've got 11 checkers for every decision maker. That inherently doesn't feel optimized. And if I come back to our formula here, that sort of management cost is weighty compared to perhaps the cost of waste it's trying to avoid, or the risks associated with escalating delivery cost or underperformance on the benefit. So there is, I think, a big prize for us to gain in terms of some of the impacts that we can make. But in the moment when we think about our own impact, really would like you to think about these sort of the power of one, because you add those up and they start to accumulate into some big numbers quite quickly, particularly for those of you working in a centre of excellence or in a PMO type function. So, and we can lean into project management itself to help us with this. So in terms of how we articulate the productivity improvements or other types of improvements that we could make through our work, you can, if you just apply good practice benefits management to project management itself, you'll be looking at things like efficiency or effectiveness or some economic impacts or compliance risk improvement. It might be a strategic outcome that you're looking to deliver, or it could be a reputational improvement that comes from some of the interventions that you're providing. And also think about the different types of benefits in terms of showcasing your impact. Some of them will be cashable. So there's a direct saving that's going to be made. So there's expenditure that's no longer used, and others could be non-cashable. So let's say that you've gained a 15% improvement in terms of your time. You're going to do something else with that time. It's not a case of you then working 15% fewer hours and being paid less. So it's a non-cashable improvement. But in aggregate, it means you're doing other things instead. And so that's still value to the organization. And some things are measurable and non-measurable. So how do we verify those impacts that we make? And the whole idea is you want to have mostly measurable impacts. And if you've got non-measurable ones, you'll have to start thinking about proxy measures. But there will come a time where the proxy measure is just, it costs too much to collect and generate rather than the value that you might get from it. And just to help you, and we'll share the link in the chat in a moment, I just sort of did a quick tutorial using ChatGPT. Said, tell me about benefits management, tell me about the different categories, tell me about the difference between cashable, non-cashable, give you some tips in terms of how I can measure them and how do I treat non-measurable benefits. And you can see my discussion that I had there, and we can think about that in relation to some of the projects that you're running as a part of your apprenticeship program. So I would like to finish there and just leave you with this thought. You know, I'm not a particularly talented person, but I do feel that one of my superpowers is that I'm quite curious and keep asking why, and why we've always done it like that. Is there a different way that we could do it? And I hope you're doing the same through your apprenticeship program and the projects that you're working on. So that's it from me, Andrew and Scott.
Thank you very much, Andy. So I've got 2 or 3 questions for you. First question is, let me just get my, so kind of 2 questions in one, but you and I talked last week about using the language that someone might use to articulate their impact, and we talked about I and we.
Yeah.
And you mentioned using I more. Could you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah, it's a real challenge that we have. Not a challenge. So I think many people who work in projects, by definition or by practice, lean towards collaboration and are very team oriented. And so I bet if you were to run a recording of your last few meetings that you've attended, or if you've got a transcript that you've got from some of your team's meetings, and just run through the language that you're using in those meetings. And I bet you use we and our in terms of talking about the projects that you're working on. And in terms of your personal impact, and in particular, you know, if you're trying to evidence it as a part of your apprenticeship program, you'll need to make a conscious switch to start saying I and mine in terms of the work that you're doing and the impact you're making. And it's not necessarily a comfortable thing for some of us to do, but if you start thinking about what is it that I'm doing, and what is it that, you know, the impact I have made rather than what we have made, I think it's really helpful in terms of honing your own skills and your activities.
Brilliant, thank you. And another question, so if I'm an apprentice, why should I record and articulate my impact? What are the benefits?
Well, otherwise you're winging it, you know. So you're winging your education and your development. Yeah, I mean, how do you understand yourself, the improvements you're making? And if you can think about, you know, what are those, you know, before and after measures that you can capture, just so that you can satisfy yourself that you're improving and developing. I think that's really quite useful. And you know, another technique that you might want to consider, particularly if some of the projects that your apprenticeship projects you're working on might relate to personal productivity gains. Keeping a journal is a really good thing to do. And if you've got some journal of some of the things that are going on your project or your work, and you're doing that, capturing it perhaps daily or weekly, again, it enables you to look back over time to say, oh yeah, so 6 months ago, I was doing these things, and I'm no longer doing that because I've delegated it or because I'm now doing something else instead.
And thank you. And I got just maybe a personal question to you. What's been your highest sort of ROI or impact habit over the last 5 years?
Oh, yeah, I think that shift from me, my to I was a lesson that I had about 15 years ago. It was when I went to get my charter. I'm a chartered director. And I know the original evidence pack that I put in place, I was talking about the successes that my team had. And I remember in my interview, the director eyeballing me across the table said, yeah, that's great. I don't want to talk about them. I'm talking about you today. and that was a shift that I had to make, which is why I brought it up before. But there's other impacts that, you know, come on to that measurable, non-measurable. And you know, if you think about some of the intangible ones, don't lose sight of those too. So I'll give you an example. I mentioned I was involved in the 2009 version of Prince 2. there was a feature in that in that version of Prince2 that was new, and it was new to pretty much all bodies of knowledge or project management frameworks. And that was the concept of learning from experience. Now, it's been around for many, many years, learning from experience, but in project management world, it was always codified such that we did things either worked or didn't work, and we captured them in a lessons learned report, and then we shared it. Or I don't know what you did with it, but you fired off the report and you would hope that things would change as a result. But all the evidence, and there was a study done by Queensland University of Technology, showed that actually we weren't doing anything with those lessons learned reports, and very few actions were really implemented when we were doing it in that way. So in Prince2, the 2009 version, we turned it on its head and said, actually, it's the duty of everyone on a project to seek lessons from other projects and think about how those lessons could be applied to my project. So it's a completely different way of thinking about it. And we did some follow-up work after Prince2 was published to find out, was there a greater uptake of lessons learned reports being used? And we did find evidence of that. And we interviewed, quite a number of project professionals, and there's very much a mindset is that now I know they're likely to be used and acted on, are more likely to be producing them. But the important thing is people were thinking about, can I go and find something from elsewhere? So that's an impact that I can sort of come down to something that I did back in 2007 when we're discussing the analysis that came out of that study, and said, well, so what can we do about it? What are the options? What are the ideas? Can we do some testing of those ideas? Can we put it into something? And since then, I actually don't know the numbers, but I think I know it's more than 1 million people have gained their Prince2 qualification who now have that as being normal. But before 2009, that was not normal. And so that's a real change that the profession has made. And a more up to date, that the latest version of Prince2 has gone beyond just sort of time, cost, quality as the sort of principal targets and measures for controlling a project, and includes the sustainability factors. And again, that's a critical thing we know we have to do in order to ensure that we still got a planet to live on, for future generations.
Thank you, Andy. Last question from me. What about perceived impact? What does that mean, and should we be recording perceived impact?
Yeah, well, if you follow that link I shared, and you'll see some of the examples in there of what we would call intangible benefits or intangible impacts, you can put a number on perception. So, in customer services, there's a well understood metric that has value called Net Promoter Score, NPS. And that's something that you can do through opinion surveys. So that, the important part there is it's opinion, so it's a perception. But when you get a number and you can track that NPS, that Net Promoter Score over time, when something changes, it prompts the question, why has it changed? What's different now? What does it mean for us? It enables you to have that data-driven discussion around the impacts of different initiatives and the consequences of it. And something like Net Promoter Score, I worked, as I said, in that retail environment back in the mid to late 90s. After that, I worked for a global tech firm that had an equivalent to Net Promoter Score, but they called it the recommendation index. So after every project, they asked, are you likely to recommend us to someone else? And they knew that the recommendation index really meant that organization was most likely to buy from that organization again. So they had direct data in terms of what a score above, say, 80% meant to them. When we went through all the project information, because it was actually a data-rich organization, we found the biggest influence on that recommendation index was the weekly reporting from the project manager to the client. So being regular in your reporting and being truthful in your reporting had the biggest influence, not whether you delivered on time, not whether the project was on budget or other things, but the biggest influence that organisation found was the regularity of the reporting between the project manager and the client.
So an apprentice could maybe create a form or a survey to say how likely are you to blah blah blah, and then get a kind of a measurement, and that's a way to track.
Yeah. So any sort of opinion, perception, you can get great proxy measures for those. And what you're really interested in them is tracking them over time and understanding how other things might have strong correlations to them.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Scott.
No, thank you, Andrew. It's like you had a window into my mind. You asked some really good questions there that really linked it well to the apprenticeship. For our apprentices, Andy, that don't have that visible outcome, they've got to sort of quantify it in a different way. We know we're going to want to get projects greenlit, and we know that they're going to want to be able to explain what they've achieved. How best can they approach this? How best can they prepare? How can they get that stakeholder buy-in, that stakeholder engagement? What steps can they take?
I guess, Scott, choosing a good project to work on in terms of I think you're talking about the 3 projects you need to do through the program. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So giving some thoughts in terms of what those projects could look like. And I don't know how you approach this in terms of the building up of the skill set that they have over the course of the program, but I would suggest the first one being a bit of a citer, so to speak, just to get your own confidence up that you're learning something, you'll be able to apply it, and you can see the impact. So if that's something that is more personal in terms of something that might improve your personal productivity or whatever it might be, but something that is more straightforward and where the results are more immediate in terms of that cycle time. And then I think that hopefully then gives the confidence to step up and in the second and third project to experiment in something where perhaps it's a bigger impact or a longer term impact. But then I'll just if you're needing buy-in from others, just apply project management to this. This good old stakeholder engagement. And coming back to that presentation, that power of one, by the way, is actually a sales technique, not a business case development technique. And it's used in sales because it's very persuasive. So if you're talking to your boss or to a key stakeholder and you're trying to identify opportunities that's important to them, so understanding things that are critical, understanding the impact of an improvement or a reduction, and then asking them what it's worth. And the what it's worth question is, so what would be the impact if you could just save 1, or if you could just increase it by 1? So it's actually it's a sort of a technique for engaging with stakeholders to understand the value of change. And then if you say, well, if this is 1 and you've got 100 of these things in your organization, then you multiply it by 100. And if that 100 happens every week, then all of a sudden you've got 400 every month. You've now got, you can roll it up to this is what it's worth on an annual basis. So that's the idea of the power of 1.
Fabulous. Thank you. That's really thought-provoking that we recognise the perceived benefit of our projects, but we challenge ourselves to come up with what it's worth, and that is a conversation that you open up to the stakeholders as well. That's excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and it's what it's worth to them as well, Scott, because that way you're not having a debate later on as to what something's worth because they told you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm happy, Terry, to open it up to the floor now. I think we need to give the learners opportunity to or whatever the next step is, make sure there's plenty of time for other people to get some good questions in.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Andrew. Obviously, thanks, Andy. Really thought-provoking. So we have got a couple of questions in the chat. So we'll go over these ones, but also, raise your hand. Feel free to raise your hands, and then we'll open up to start questions and answers. So first question then that we've got in the chat then, Andy. So how do we deal if the data/information on the previous project are limited or publicly not available elsewhere? So this is related to building a schedule or risk register, lessons learnt. This is apart from applying expertise. The view/end goal is to avoid any biases. So this is a question from Sandeep. So Sandeep, do feel free to add anything. But yeah, Andy.
Yeah, it's a good question, because there are often projects where it's first of a kind, or if it's not the first of a kind, you're just unsighted on others, or the others are inaccessible to you. So again, one of the things that I assume that you've got is, starting with your requirements and the scope and being able to break it down into smaller parts. Although we often say that our projects are unique, I think that's true in the sort of the totality of the project. It's not true for many of the parts. So once you've broken it down into the parts, then the question about, can I find data or lessons or information related to that part somewhere else, you're more likely to. So it's Sandeep, breaking it down into the smaller parts and seeking the information for the parts, I think is the useful one. And then after that, I think there's some logic testing that you can do in terms of again, just taking extreme positions to say, what if this was to be a fraction of that, or what if this could be a massive multiplier of that? What would be the conditions to make it that multiplier, or the conditions for it to be the fraction? Through that sort of logic analysis, you can then start to develop the assumptions that you're going to base your estimates on, particularly if you're using those sort of 3-point estimating approach. What are the assumptions for the lower estimate, for the middle, and for the higher one, for them likely to be true? So there are some techniques that could be done there. And then the last part about bias is the power in the crowd. So the more people are consulted, I think there's this huge evidence that the more likely to have a reasonable answer for that, or estimate for it.
Excellent, thank you, Andy. So we've got another question in the chat as well, which is, when talking about success metrics, how would you recommend setting them up and measuring them?
Coming back to that stakeholder bit earlier, wherever possible, align the success metrics to the things that your stakeholders care about, because that will gain their interest. So that would be my go-to position. Again, coming back from that discussion as to what it's worth, and using that power of one, then start to think about the success measures from the stakeholder perspective.
Thank you, Andy. That was a question from Laura. So Laura, let us know if you've got anything further on that. We do have some other questions, but Andrew, have you got a question there as well?
If you've got other questions, that's great. I couldn't see them, so go for those. Carry on.
One more, and then I'll come back over to you then. So another question then that we've got here is, can tutors in monthly PDA playgrounds stimulate discussion between learners to see what they have been able to do towards the power of one as knowledge sharing to help give inspiration? Absolutely, I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, and I should imagine there'll be some similar projects that are being worked on across the this cohort and prior ones. So sharing some of those measures and some of those powers of one is a great idea.
And the PDA playground is the perfect space to share that. The power of one, I think, like I say, is very, very useful on that basis. Particularly for those learners in the public sector, do you have any advice on how they can make the first small step of improvement to say they're managing to implement the IPA paper on project delivery and data sharing, and the difficulties of getting real data?
Yeah, so good question. So I'll try to find a link whilst for that, but or whoever asked the question, perhaps put the link in. But there's a paper that came out last March. It's I think it's a year to the date next week. It was a joint paper, so my organisation, the MPA, was involved in developing it along with the APM, and we also had input from Number 10's data science unit and the Chief Digital and Data Officer, CDDO. Oh, thanks, Christoph. The link's in the chat. And it's got a number of work streams in there. One of them, for example, is experimenting together. So and sort of sharing across government. Another one is around upskilling at scale. So some of those are recommendations for the centre, if you like, and others are more sort of mindset type recommendations. So thanks for referencing that. I think it's a really important publication. I think one of the things that publication gives you is a bit of a mandate, if you like, a bit of top cover. So when you are talking to your stakeholders and to decision makers within your organizations, and you're proposing a more data-driven approach, and if you're getting any pushback, do make reference to it, because that was part of its intent, which is to empower project professionals to step up and take more of a data-driven approach. But I'll come back in terms of answering the essence of the question, which is how can you make those first steps. My recommendation earlier is that start on something that helps you in terms of your own effectiveness or efficiency, particularly the latter, efficiency, because if that gives you more time, that's more time you can spend on yourself, in terms of further development, or more time that you can spend on being more impactful on your project. So I'll start at home, if you like, do something that improves your own immediate environment, build upon that, and then expand it out to something that perhaps impacts the team, and then perhaps build it out then to something that impacts the project or projects portfolio more broadly.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andy. So again, just open to the room. Please do pop your hand up and ask any questions, and we'll go around everybody in order. So, Andrew.
Yeah, I was just I'm really enjoying this. Thank you, Andy. And just wondering about further learning. So you showed us some books there at the start. Could you recommend us some books where we can go and get further learning about this?
Yeah, thanks. So I sort of flashed up the screen when I talked about that shift to a data-driven approach. And there are some barriers that we face. So again, see if we can find a link to it. There's a study done by Warwick University. We often call it the Barriers Report. It was in 2021 that came out before the manifesto that was published. And it was the things that we struggle with preventing us from using data analytics and so on. And one of the things that it uncovered, obviously, projects are temporary. So there's something about projects that does make it harder. So they're temporary. So when the project finishes, what happens with all that data that's generated during the course of the project? Whereas if we were a manufacturing process, that data would be maintained and would just be feeding into the next cycle of the manufacturing process and so on. So there's the temporary nature. Projects are cross-cutting because if they're not cross-cutting and you could deliver it within an existing business unit or team, then you're better off delivering that change just through line management and performance management. You wouldn't set the overhead of a project up to deliver it. So the cross-cutting nature of projects means that data sits in silos. It's not necessarily all in one place. So there's a number of things that we know are contextual as to why projects are hard or harder than in other management disciplines to apply a data-driven approach. But if we look at elsewhere where they apply a data-driven approach and we can learn from it, that's a great thing to do. So one of the books that I read and got inspiration from, something as thuggish as football or soccer for those that aren't from the UK, and their shift to taking a data-driven approach, which actually was inspired in itself through what happened in the US with baseball, where the Oakland Athletic or Oakland A's applied a data analytics approach to the recruitment of their players and the formation of a balanced team, and also defining a style of play that optimized their runs, so their scores, and all they needed to do was get above an average each time, and they would on average win more games than they would lose. And so it was a very statistical approach that they took, all to do with just running to first base rather than trying to get all the way around with the glory shot. So something as sluggish as football. So here we go, expected goals, and it's there's some great insights in here about how football fell in love with data analytics through things like Opta. And the title of this, Expected Goals, I think is possibly the biggest gift of the book, because they struggled for more than a decade from applying data analytics to projects when there was a wealth of insights available, and there's a wealth of capability in terms of applying data analytics to football. But people just weren't getting it. The decision makers at the clubs and elsewhere, and in particular the TV coverage, wasn't really reporting and sharing the data analytics insights that was available. And that's because a lot of the statistical labels that we use and some of the data labels that we use aren't very user-friendly. And so, one of the statistics they had, and I can't remember the label for it before, but it was the likelihood of you scoring a goal depending upon where you are on the pitch, where the ball is, and where the other players are, and sort of other sort of game state factors. And what you have is you add them up over the course of a game. Depending upon sort of how many shots and so on, and you end up with this thing called expected goals. That had another name before, and it was a name that had been used for 10 years or so, and no one got it. And they asked the question, what would a pundit, like say Gary Neville, would use if he was trying to describe this? And it was that change that captured the imagination of the profession and the viewing public in terms of understanding what we mean by these. So this shift from a very technical label to a label that every person could understand was a game changer for soccer. And I think in projects we should do the same. And I had an experience, just to give you one example. I sat on a portfolio board of a big portfolio, so 800 million a year being spent. The organisation had just come out of administration, so it was the administrators that set up the portfolio reporting. And at the portfolio level, we have SPI and CPI, Scheduled Performance Index and Cost Performance Index. And it was used in every individual project, and it rolled up, and they had a portfolio level SPI, CPI. And they were discussing these reports, and they were discussing the impact on the portfolio and the cash flow that they needed to run the portfolio projects over the coming quarters. And I just asked a question: does everyone here know what SPI and CPI mean? And there's a bit of bluffing going on, but the truth was those senior executives, that organization, did not know what SPI and CPI meant. And so, is there an equivalent in our project world where we could say, rather than SPI, CPI, we could say expected project? Is there an expected project type label that we could have instead of our very technical terms? So that's, for me, was a gift from that book, Andrew.
That was amazing. Thank you. Yeah. I don't know if we have any more questions.
Okay, we've just got one last one, unless obviously, as we've always said, anyone do feel free to raise your hands or pop any more in. But we've just got one last one then in Q&A, which is, what are the most common data gaps or quality issues that hinder accurate ROI measurement in large scale projects?
Okay, so I don't think this is necessarily, so the biggest data gap I see in large scale projects are not the the sort of very activity-based ones, so sort of time and cost, schedule type data, risk registers, and so on. There's a lot of data that sits in the various tools that are being used, and the various systems that support the project, even if it's sitting across organizational boundaries. So that data, you can get it if you try hard enough. The data that I think is really interesting that we perhaps don't have are the sort of the behavioral data. So we talked earlier about stakeholder buy-in and net promoter score. Now, having a net promoter score for your project, where you regularly pulse the project team, stakeholders and others about the mood of the project, I think is really valuable. And yet we don't necessarily have the records or the data that supports that. So for example, the hypothesis I've had just on my own experience, so this is in danger if I acted upon it, would put me into my winging it world. But on business change projects I've worked on, I've always observed, not always, I've often observed a relationship between how often the sponsor attends the project board meetings and the level of buy-in it has beyond the immediate department or business unit. And you can often see an inflection point when the sponsor starts sending a substitute or missing a few meetings, that something else more important is going on in the organization, and you start to lose your talented resources because they get stolen for another more important project. And so if project management was a game of poker, that's often a tell for me, is the first time the sponsor misses a meeting or sends a substitute, there might be good reasons. If it happens the second time in a row, you're thinking, okay, there's obviously something more important going on. How do I keep hold of my expert team? Because the likelihood is that someone else is eyeing them up. And if their project's more important than yours, there's a really good chance they'll get them taken off your project and put onto theirs as well. So that's a hypothesis I have. I have no way of proving it, but if we had that sort of data in terms of those behavioural things, how often are people missing meetings, for example, I think that's really valuable. Or risk registers, how many risks are all owned by the same person? We don't think of that sort of analysis that could help us understand the dynamics of the relationships that are going on in a project.
Amazing. Thank you. And in terms of like giving out a book to the best question, we'll do it by email. So we'll choose the best question, and then we'll find out what they're interested in, and then you'll pick a book specific on their interests. So if you're interested in football or not.
If you don't like football, then there's two others. Hannah Fry, fantastic mathematician and sort of science communicator. And so this is one, I think it's sort of around 2015. But if you read it now, you realize how right she was in so many things, including what was going to happen with the US general elections and other things. So that's a cracking book, all data driven. And another one is about how rubbish we are as humans in understanding numbers and how we jump to conclusions. So Noise is a really good book as well.
Wonderful, thank you for that, Andy. Thank you, Andrew and Scott. Some really interesting questions, and I think have read of those books, even if you aren't the winner from the discussion and Andy's wonderful explanation there. So before we do end the session, I just want to thank everybody for attending today, and of course thank you to Andy Murray, Andrew Brown and Scott Owens for their really insightful insights there. Have a think about today's session, have a reflection of that, chat with your tutor next time that you speak to them, think about the projects that you're building and think about how we can help you achieve your idea. What sort of barriers do you have to actually recording that value, recording that impact, and have that conversation with your tutors on your next one-to-ones, or feel free just to reach out to the L&D chat. email inbox and somebody will obviously pick that up straight away and respond. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everybody.